The only thing my husband Thomas asked of me when he said goodbye was, "Please don't go to the Adirondack cabin, Maggie. Promise me." He squeezed my hand with the last vestiges of strength he had left, his eyes pleading with an intensity that frightened me. I promised him. I always respected his wishes, even when curiosity consumed me. But 3 years after his death, curiosity finally won, and what I found in that remote cabin would change everything I thought I knew about the man I loved for 40 years. My name is Margaret Collins, though everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 61 years old, and until that cold October morning when I finally broke my promise, I thought I had grieved fully, moved on as much as anyone could after losing their soulmate. But grief, I've learned, isn't a linear process. It circles back, finds new ways to surprise you, reveals truths you weren't ready to face. Thomas died from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, a cruel illness that slowly paralyzed his body while leaving his mind sharp and aware until the very end. We had 2 years from diagnosis to death, 2 years of watching the man I loved, a brilliant architect who designed buildings that touch the sky, gradually lose the ability to hold a pencil, to walk, to breathe on his own. Our daughter, Rachel, was 25 when he died, just starting her career in marketing in Boston. The 3 of us were a tight unit, especially after Thomas's diagnosis. Or so I thought. The morning Thomas died, he was in our bedroom, the hospital bed we'd rented, positioned so he could see the garden I'd planted for him. Autumn leaves drifted past the window, and his breathing was labored despite the oxygen mask. I held his hand, and Rachel sat on the other side of the bed, both of us knowing these were his final hours. His eyes moved between us, trying to communicate something beyond words, as his speech had deteriorated weeks earlier. "Dad," Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We love you. We'll be okay. You can rest now." But Thomas's eyes fixed on me, urgent, desperate. With tremendous effort, he lifted one finger, pointing at the notepad we kept nearby. Rachel handed it to me, and I found the last thing he'd written, probably hours earlier when we'd briefly left the room. In his shaky handwriting, barely legible, were the words, "Never go to Adirondack cabin. Promise me, Maggie. Keep Rachel away. Trust me. I love you." "Thomas," I said, confusion mixing with grief. "What cabin? We don't have a cabin." But his eyes were already closing, his breathing becoming more irregular. He squeezed my hand one last time, so weakly I almost didn't feel it, and then he was gone. The funeral was a blur of condolences, casseroles, and well-meaning friends who promised that time would heal. Thomas's architecture firm sent representatives. His clients spoke of his vision and integrity, and Rachel stood beside me, both of us trying to hold together while everything fell apart. What I remember most clearly was the appearance of Thomas's 2 sisters, Catherine and Diane, whom we hadn't seen in over 5 years. They arrived at the funeral in expensive black dresses, their faces carefully composed in expressions of grief that somehow never reached their eyes. "Margaret, we're so sorry," Catherine said, embracing me with the warmth of a stranger. She was the older sister, 58, with Thomas's same sharp cheekbones, but none of his kindness. "Such a tragedy," Diane added. She was 55, softer looking. Then Catherine, but with the same calculating gaze. Thomas was too young, too talented. They had always made me uncomfortable, these sisters who treated Thomas with a strange mixture of condescension and resentment. He rarely spoke about his childhood, about growing up with them in upstate New York. But when he did, there was always a shadow in his expression. "Thank you for coming," I managed to say, exhausted from grief and the effort of being gracious. "Of course," Catherine replied. "We're family after all. We should talk soon about Thomas's affairs. There are family matters that need addressing." I was too numb to question what she meant. Rachel took over, politely but firmly ushering them toward the refreshments, protecting me from further conversation. 3 years passed. I continued teaching music theory at the community college, though my heart wasn't in it anymore. Rachel visited monthly from Boston, and we developed a new normal, the 2 of us navigating holidays and birthdays and ordinary days without Thomas. I thought I had adapted. I thought I had accepted his death and moved forward. But there was always, That note, those final written words, nagging at the back of my mind. What cabin? Why did he want me to stay away? It was Rachel who finally brought it up, during a Sunday dinner at my house. "Mom," she said, pushing her pasta around her plate, "have you ever wondered about what Dad wrote? About the cabin?" "Every day," I admitted. "But I promised him I wouldn't go. Maybe he was just confused at the end," she suggested. "The medication, the lack of oxygen. Maybe there is no cabin." "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. Thomas had been lucid until his final hour. Whatever he wrote, he meant it. The call came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years and 2 months after Thomas's death. I was grading papers when my phone rang. "Mrs. Collins? This is Gerald Morrison, Thomas Collins's attorney." My heart skipped. Thomas's estate had been settled years ago. Why would his attorney be calling now? "Yes, Mr. Morrison. How can I help you?" "I have something for you." Thomas left specific instructions that this was only to be delivered 3 years after his passing. I'm following his wishes, though I confess I've been curious about it myself. "What is it?" "An envelope and a key. Can you come to my office today?" I drove to Morrison's office in a daze, my mind spinning with possibilities. The office was in downtown Albany, in one of those old buildings Thomas had always admired for their architectural integrity. Morrison was a dignified man in his 70s, with kind eyes that had probably witnessed countless family dramas. He slid a sealed envelope across his desk, along with a small wooden box. "Thomas came to see me 4 years ago," Morrison explained. "He was very specific about the timeline. 3 years after his death, no sooner." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Thomas's handwriting from before the ALS had ravaged his motor control. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, 3 years have passed since I left you. I hope you found some peace, some way to move forward. I hope Rachel is thriving. I think about you both constantly. By now, you've probably been tormented by my final request about the cabin. I'm sorry for the mystery, but I had my reasons. Now it's time for you to know the truth. The key opens a cabin in the Adirondack Mountains near Lake Placid. The address is written below. I bought it 5 years ago, and I've spent the last 4 years of my life transforming it into something I hope you'll find beautiful. I know I made you promise never to go there. I'm releasing you from that promise now. In fact, I'm asking you to go. Just once, spend a few days there. In the main room, you'll find a tape player and a box of cassettes labeled For Maggie. Everything else will make sense when you get there. I love you more than words could ever express. I always have. I always will. Yours, Thomas." Tears blurred my vision. Even 3 years after his death, Thomas still had the power to surprise me. "What's in the box?" I asked Morrison, though my focus was still on the letter. "The key to the property. And this." He opened the wooden box, revealing an antique brass key attached to a small tag with an address, and something else. A cassette tape labeled Start Here. "There's more," Morrison said, pulling out another folder. "Thomas's sisters have been making inquiries. They seem to believe they have a claim to some property Thomas owned." My stomach tightened. "What kind of claim?" "They're alleging that Thomas purchased property using money from a family trust that should have been divided among the 3 siblings. They've hired lawyers and are preparing to contest ownership. That doesn't make sense. Thomas and I shared all our finances. I would have known about a family trust." Morrison's expression was grave. "Family dynamics can be complicated, Mrs. Collins. Thomas left me a sealed document to give you if his sisters made any legal moves." "Would you like to see it?" He handed me another envelope, this one thicker. Inside were legal documents, copies of a will from Thomas's parents dating back 15 years, bank statements, and a handwritten note from Thomas. "Maggie, if you're reading this section, it means Catherine and Diane are coming for the cabin. They will claim family rights, shared inheritance, emotional connections. Don't believe any of it. The cabin is yours, legally purchased with money I earned myself. I have proof. But more importantly, I have the truth about what they did. In the cabin, in the attic. You'll find everything you need to understand why I kept this secret, and why my sisters cannot be allowed anywhere near what I built for you." I looked up at Morrison. "When did his sisters start making inquiries?" 2 months ago. They filed preliminary paperwork last week. How did they even know about the cabin?" "I'm not certain," but property records are public. If they were watching for any assets connected to Thomas's name, they would have found it eventually. I pocketed the key, the weight of it substantial in my hand. I'm going to the cabin today. Morrison nodded approvingly. I thought you might say that. I took the liberty of having the property checked last week. The utilities are functional, and there's a caretaker who's been maintaining it, a Mrs. Chen. She's expecting you might visit soon. Thomas hired a caretaker? He set up a trust to pay for ongoing maintenance. Mrs. Chen has been caring for the property for 4 years. She never met Thomas, but she follows his detailed instructions to the letter. I left Morrison's office with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in 3 years. Thomas had left me a mystery, and I was finally going to solve it. The drive to the Adirondacks took 5 hours, winding through increasingly remote terrain. The address led me deep into the mountains, far from the tourist areas, down a private road that cut through dense forest. When I finally found it, I had to stop the car and just stare. It wasn't a cabin. Not really. It was a beautiful 2-story structure built from stone and wood, perfectly integrated into the mountainside, with huge windows overlooking a pristine private lake. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the late afternoon sun made the whole place glow like something from a dream. A woman in her 50s appeared on the porch, waving. Mrs. Chen, presumably. Mrs. Collins? She called as I got out of the car. I'm so glad you came. Mr. Collins, he talked about this day. You knew my husband? Not personally. We only communicated through letters and phone calls, but I feel I knew him through his love for you. Everything here, every detail he planned for you. She led me inside, and I stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed. The main room was enormous, with vaulted ceilings and that spectacular window wall overlooking the lake. But what took my breath away was the music. Not music playing, but music everywhere. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with vinyl records, thousands of them, meticulously organized in custom wooden shelving. In the center of the room sat a vintage turntable, and beside it, a leather armchair positioned perfectly for listening. Mr. Collins spent 4 years collecting these, Mrs. Chen said softly. He told me you used to love vinyl, that you had a collection when you were young that you sold to help pay for his graduate school. I had. I'd owned over 300 records, rare jazz pressings, first edition Beatles albums, signed Bob Dylan records. I'd sold them 20 years ago without hesitation because Thomas needed tuition money and we were struggling. He'd felt terrible about it, but I'd insisted. It was just music, I'd told him. We'd build our collection again someday. Someday had finally come, but Thomas wasn't here to see it. How many are there? I whispered. Over 4,000. He bought back every record you sold, if he could find them. And then he kept going, building a collection he thought you'd love. I walked slowly along the shelves, running my fingers over the spines. There were my original records. I recognized them by the specific wear patterns, the corner creases I'd created. And thousands more, a lifetime of music, carefully curated. On a table near the turntable was a wooden box, and on top of it, a note in Thomas's handwriting, "Start here." With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside were 52 cassette tapes, each labeled with a week number. Week 1, without me. Week 2, without me. All the way to week 52. Beside the box was a vintage tape player, already loaded with a tape labeled Week 1. Mrs. Chen touched my shoulder gently. He recorded them during his final months. 1 message for each week of your first year without him. He said you'd need time to grieve before you were ready to hear them. That's why he waited 3 years. I sank into the leather chair, the tape player in my lap. The sun was setting over the lake, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I'll leave you alone, Mrs. Chen said. I'm in the caretaker's cottage if you need anything. Take your time. After she left, I sat there for a long moment, looking at the tapes, at the records, at the beautiful room Thomas had created. Then, with a deep breath, I pressed play. Static, then his voice, already weakened by ALS, but still unmistakably him. Hello, my love. Week 1. By now I've been gone for 3 years and you've finally made it to our cabin. I knew you would. I knew curiosity would win eventually. You were always too smart, too stubborn to let mysteries stay unsolved. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. I'm recording this 6 months before I die. The ALS is progressing, but my mind is still clear, and I have things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you while I was alive, but I was afraid. Afraid of how you'd look at me. Afraid of burdening you with more than the illness already was." He paused, and I could hear him breathing. That labored sound that had haunted his final months. "This cabin is more than just a building, Maggie. It's the childhood home I left behind at 18, swearing never to return. It was falling apart, abandoned for years. But 4 years ago, when I got my diagnosis, I decided to reclaim it. To transform the place that held my worst memories into something beautiful for you." Another pause. Longer this time. "My sisters will come for it. They're probably already circling, aren't they? They always wanted this land, always resented that our parents left it to me instead of dividing it equally. What they don't know is that I bought it from our parents before they died, paid fair market value when the property was worthless. I have the documents to prove it." His voice hardened slightly. "But that's a conversation for later tapes. Right now, I just want you to know that every record in this room was chosen thinking of you. Every evening I spent here, planning and building and collecting, I was thinking of you." The tape ended there, just as the last light faded from the sky. I sat in darkness, tears streaming down my face, feeling Thomas's presence more strongly than I had since the day he died. A car engine broke the silence. Through the window I saw headlights coming up the private road. 2 cars moving fast. Mrs. Chen appeared at the door, her face worried. "Mrs. Collins, I think you should know. 2 women called this afternoon, claiming to be Thomas's sisters. They said they were coming tonight to inspect the property. I told them not to come without legal authorization, but..." The cars pulled up outside. I watched through the window as 4 people got out. I recognized Catherine and Diane immediately, even after 5 years. With them were 2 men in suits, probably lawyers. They were here, just as Thomas had predicted. The battle for his final gift had begun, and I was completely unprepared. Or was I? Thomas had left me 51 more tapes, a year of messages, a year of preparation. Whatever was coming, he had anticipated it. As Catherine's sharp knock echoed through the cabin, I looked at the tape player, at the box of remaining messages, at the thousands of records surrounding me like an army of silent witnesses. "I'm coming, Thomas," I whispered. "I promise I'm listening." I didn't answer the door immediately. Instead, I carefully ejected the tape from the player, placed it back in its case, and tucked the entire box under a nearby blanket. Whatever Thomas had recorded, his sisters didn't need to know about it yet. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Margaret, we know you're in there." Catherine's voice called through the door. "We saw your car. We need to talk." I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the door with as much composure as I could muster. Catherine stood on the porch, perfectly coiffed as always, with Diane just behind her. The 2 men in suits hung back slightly, legal briefcases in hand. "Catherine, Diane." I kept my voice neutral. "This is unexpected, is it?" Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Surely you knew we'd need to discuss Thomas's property eventually." "Thomas's property is settled. His estate was probated 3 years ago. This property wasn't included in that estate," Diane interjected, her voice softer than Catherine's but no less determined. "This was family land, Margaret. It should have been divided among all of us." "I think you should leave," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "If you have legal concerns, you can contact my attorney." "We just want to talk," Catherine insisted, taking a step forward. "Surely we can be civilized about this. We're family, after all." "Family you haven't contacted in 5 years," I observed. "Family you only remembered existed when you learned about valuable property." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mrs. Collins, I'm Richard Blackwell, representing Ms. Catherine and Ms. Diane Collins. We have documentation suggesting this property was purchased using funds from a family trust that should have benefited all 3 siblings equally. Do you have a warrant or court order requiring me to discuss this with you tonight?" I asked, remembering Morrison's advice. "Well, no, but then this conversation is over. Good night." I started to close the door, but Catherine put her hand against it. "Margaret, don't be difficult. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We're willing to be generous. 1/3 for you, 1/3 for each of us. Everyone walks away satisfied. I'm already satisfied with 100%, thank you." "That's not legally yours," Diane said, her soft voice taking on an edge. Thomas deceived you about the origins of this property. When the truth comes out, you'll lose everything. The truth, I repeated slowly. You want to talk about the truth? Let's talk about why Thomas never spoke to either of you after your parents died. Let's talk about why he changed his phone number and moved without telling you where. Both sisters' faces hardened. Ancient history, Catherine dismissed. Family disputes that have nothing to do with current property rights. I think they have everything to do with it, I said quietly. Now please leave, or I'll call the police. After a tense moment, Catherine stepped back. We'll be back with proper legal authority. And Margaret? We always get what we're owed. Always. They retreated to their cars, and I watched them drive away, my hands shaking as I locked the door. Mrs. Chen appeared from the shadows of the porch. Are you all right, Mrs. Collins? No, I admitted. But I will be. Did you hear all that? Enough. Mr. Collins warned me they would come. He said they were relentless once they decided they wanted something. I looked back at the room full of records, at the hidden box of tapes. Mrs. Chen, Thomas mentioned an attic. Is there a way up? Yes, but it's hidden. Mr. Collins didn't want casual visitors to find it. Follow me. She led me to what appeared to be a solid wall of bookshelves in the back hallway. She pressed a specific sequence of books, and the entire section swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase. He was very clever, your husband, Mrs. Chen said with a small smile. The whole cabin is full of surprises like this. The attic was smaller than the main room, but no less impressive. The space had been converted into what could only be described as a war room. 3 walls were covered in corkboard, pinned with documents, photographs, legal papers, and a detailed timeline written in Thomas's meticulous handwriting. The timeline started 15 years ago, shortly after Thomas's parents died, and tracked every suspicious financial transaction, every questionable legal document, every instance where Catherine and Diane had manipulated family assets for their benefit. Oh, Thomas, I whispered, seeing the scope of what he'd uncovered. What did they do to you? Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway. He spent months compiling this. Every visit to the cabin, he'd spend hours up here, documenting, verifying, building his case. I moved closer to examine the documents. Bank statements showing transfers from the family trust to Catherine's personal accounts. Legal documents with signatures that didn't match Thomas's handwriting, despite bearing his name. Emails between the sisters discussing how to handle the Thomas problem. They forged his signature, I breathed, looking at a property deed. They sold family land and kept all the money, making it look like Thomas had agreed. That's not all. Mrs. Chen pointed to another section. Look at the timeline after your parents-in-law died. The documents showed that Thomas's parents had left specific instructions in their will. The cabin and surrounding land was to go to Thomas alone, as he was the only one who'd ever appreciated it. The rest of the estate was to be divided among all 3 children, but the will that was probated was different. In that version, everything was to be divided equally, with no mention of the cabin going specifically to Thomas. They switched the wills, I said, understanding dawning. They made sure the real will never made it to the probate court. Mr. Collins discovered this 2 years after his parents died. By then, most of the estate had been liquidated and divided, but he had kept the original will, and he had proof the probated version was fraudulent. Why didn't he report them? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. He thought about it, Mrs. Chen said softly. But by then you had Rachel. He didn't want his daughter growing up with her aunts in prison. He thought he could just walk away, build his own life, forget about them. But they wouldn't let him forget, I concluded, looking at more recent documents showing attempted contact from the sisters over the years, always when they needed something or wanted to ask about potential inheritance. In the center of the room was a desk, and on it, a cassette tape labeled "For Maggie, When the Sisters Come." Beside it was another tape labeled "For Rachel, When She Needs to Know." I picked up my tape, then noticed something else on the desk. A thick folder marked Property Value Assessment, Confidential. Inside were professional appraisals, market analyses, and development proposals. The cabin and its surrounding 50 acres weren't just valuable, they were extraordinarily valuable. A luxury spa resort company called Tranquility Retreats was planning a massive development in the area. and Thomas's land was the key to their entire project. According to the documents, the property was currently worth $8 million. But if it was sold to Tranquility Retreats for their resort development, it could be worth upwards of $20 million. They know, I said aloud. Catherine and Diane know about the resort development. That's why they're here now, after years of silence. Mr. Collins thought they might, Mrs. Chen confirmed. That's why he prepared so thoroughly. He knew they wouldn't be able to resist the lure of that much money. I took both tapes and the property assessment folder back downstairs. The night had fully set in, and through the vast windows, I could see stars reflecting on the lake's surface. Thomas and I had talked about retiring somewhere quiet like this, but we'd never actually done it. Now I understood why. He was already here, building this sanctuary in secret. I made tea in the kitchen, which was fully stocked thanks to Mrs. Chen's care, and settled back into the leather chair. This time I loaded the tape marked, "When the Sisters Come." Thomas's voice filled the room, stronger than in the first tape, probably recorded earlier in his illness. "Maggie, if you're listening to this, Catherine and Diane have shown their true colors again. I'm sorry you have to deal with them. I'd hoped they'd have the decency to leave you alone. But I knew better than to count on their decency." He paused, and I heard papers rustling. "By now, you've probably seen the attic. Seen what they did all those years ago. What you don't know is why I kept it secret. Why I didn't prosecute them, why I walked away." Another pause, longer this time. "When you were pregnant with Rachel, my mother called me. She was dying, and she wanted to tell me the truth about the will. She said Catherine and Diane had pressured her to change it, to make everything equal, but she'd refused. She wanted me to have the cabin because I was the only one who loved it, who understood its value beyond money." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Mom told me she'd hidden the real will in the cabin, in a specific place only I would know. She died 2 days later. When I went to the cabin for her funeral, the place was locked up tight. Catherine and Diane had taken control of the estate immediately, and they weren't letting me near the property." I could hear the old pain in his voice. "It took me 6 months to get access. And by then, they'd already probated the fake will. When I finally found Mom's real will, hidden exactly where she said it would be, I had proof of their fraud. But I also had a newborn daughter and a wife I loved more than revenge." He cleared his throat. "I made a choice, Maggie. I decided to let them think they'd won. I walked away, started fresh in Albany, built my architecture firm, raised our beautiful girl. I thought I could forget about them, forget about the cabin." His tone changed, becoming more determined. But the ALS diagnosis changed everything. Suddenly, I was facing my mortality, thinking about legacy, about what I wanted to leave behind. And I realized I didn't want to leave my sister's victory. I didn't want them to win. I heard him take a shaky breath, so I went back. I contacted Catherine and Diane through a lawyer, told them I wanted to buy the cabin from the estate. They laughed at me, said the place was worthless, a falling-down shack in the middle of nowhere, not worth the property taxes they were paying. They were happy to sell it to me for $50,000, which was less than the land was worth. A dry laugh. They had no idea that I'd already done research. That I knew about Tranquility Retreat's plans. That I knew this worthless property would be worth millions within a few years. They couldn't sign the papers fast enough, thrilled to get money for something they considered a burden. More rustling of papers. "I have the deed, Maggie. I have the sale documents. I have receipts showing I paid them with money from my own accounts, nothing from any family trust. The cabin is legally, unquestionably yours. And in the attic, you have everything you need to prove their previous fraud if they try to contest the sale." His voice softened. "But here's what they don't know. What even you don't know yet. I didn't just buy the cabin. I bought back everything they stole. Every piece of land they sold off, every family heirloom they liquidated. I've been secretly acquiring it all for the past 4 years." I sat up straighter, shocked. The original property was 200 acres, Maggie. My parents' entire estate. Catherine and Diane sold most of it off piece by piece, pocketing the money. I've spent the last 4 years tracking down every buyer, every new owner, and buying it back. It cost me almost everything I'd saved, but it was worth it. He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The cabin isn't sitting on 50 acres, my love. It's sitting on 175 acres. I couldn't find all of it, but I got most of it back. And thanks to the resort development, that land is now worth not $8 million, but close to $30 million, I gasped. The teacup nearly slipping from my hands. My sisters sold their inheritance for pennies, and now it's yours. All of it, legal, documented, uncontestable. The deed is in the safe. The combination is Rachel's birthday. Everything is in your name, transferred 3 years before I died, so there's no question of deathbed manipulation. His voice grew serious again. They're going to fight you, Maggie. They're going to try every legal trick they know. They'll probably try to manipulate Rachel, too. She doesn't know about any of this, about what her aunts did, about how they betrayed our family. That's what the other tape is for. When the time comes, when she needs to understand, play it for her. He was quiet for a moment, just breathing. I love you, Maggie. I love how strong you are, how smart, how capable. You can handle this. You can beat them. And when you do, when the cabin and land are safely and permanently yours, I hope you'll do something for me. Anything, I whispered to the recording. There's a room you haven't found yet. Mrs. Chen can show you. It's my final gift, and I think it might be the most important one. But first, you need to secure our legacy. You need to win this battle. The tape ended. I sat there for a long time, watching the stars over the lake, thinking about Thomas's secret war, his patient revenge, his careful planning. He'd spent the final years of his life not just creating a beautiful space for me, but reclaiming everything his sisters had stolen, turning their greed against them. The next morning, I called Morrison and told him everything I'd discovered. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. Mrs. Collins, if everything you've described is accurate, you have an incredibly strong legal position. Thomas documented everything meticulously. There's more, I said. He bought back most of the original family estate. The cabin is sitting on over 100 acres, not 50. Morrison whistled softly. That changes everything. With the resort development, we're talking about property worth tens of millions. His sisters don't know yet. They think they're fighting over a cabin and 50 acres. Let's keep it that way for now. Don't reveal the full extent of the property until we absolutely have to. Mrs. Collins, I'll need copies of everything in that attic. Can you photograph it all and send it to me? I'll do it today. Good. And Mrs. Collins? Thomas was a remarkable man. What he did, the way he planned for this, it's extraordinary. After we hung up, I spent the morning photographing every document in the attic. Each picture was another piece of evidence. Another nail in the sisters' legal coffin. Mrs. Chen brought me lunch. Homemade soup that reminded me of Thomas's favorite recipe. There's something you should know, she said as I ate. Your daughter called the house phone this morning. I didn't answer, but she left a message. She played it for me. Rachel's voice, tense and confused. Mrs. Chen, this is Rachel Collins. I'm trying to reach my mother. If she's there, please have her call me. It's important. My aunts, Catherine and Diane, they reached out to me yesterday. They're saying Mom is trying to steal family property and they need my help to stop her. I don't understand what's going on, but I need to talk to Mom immediately. My stomach sank. Just as Thomas had predicted, they were trying to manipulate Rachel. I need to call her, I said, pulling out my phone. Wait, Mrs. Chen said gently. Mr. Collins left specific instructions about this. He said if the sisters contacted Rachel, you should play her the tape he made for her before you talk to her yourself. He said it would be easier for her to hear the truth from him. She was right. Rachel had been Daddy's girl, had worshipped Thomas. If anyone could make her understand, it was him. Can you send her a message? I asked. Tell her to come to the cabin. Don't tell her I'm here. Just say it's important regarding her father's final wishes. Mrs. Chen nodded. I'll do it now. That evening, as the sun set over the lake, I heard a car coming up the road. Rachel had made good time from Boston, probably driven with a mix of curiosity and worry. I watched from the window as she got out of her car, looking at the cabin with confusion. This wasn't the falling-down shack Catherine and Diane had probably described. This was a beautiful, well-maintained home. She knocked, and I opened the door to see my daughter's face shift from confusion to shock. Mom? What are you doing here? Mrs. Chen said, Come in, Rachel. We need to talk. She stepped inside and stopped, just as I had, overwhelmed by the thousands of vinyl records lining the walls. What is this place? she whispered. "This is what your father built for us," I said softly. "This is the secret he kept, the legacy he left. And it's time you knew the whole truth about your father's family, and why we need to fight for what's ours." I gestured to the leather chair, to the tape player with her father's final message loaded and ready. "Sit down, sweetheart. Your father has something he needs to tell you." Rachel sat in the leather chair, her hands gripping the armrests as I loaded the tape marked, "For Rachel, when she needs to know." Her face was pale, confused, probably wondering if her aunts had been right about me losing my mind. "Mom, what's going on?" "Aunt Catherine and Aunt Diane said you're trying to steal property that belongs to the whole family. They said Dad was confused at the end, that he made decisions he shouldn't have made." "Just listen," I said gently. Pressing play. Thomas's voice filled the room, and Rachel's eyes immediately filled with tears. She hadn't heard his voice since the funeral, hadn't been prepared for the rush of grief and love that comes from hearing a lost parent speak again. "Hello, my beautiful girl," Thomas said, his voice warm despite the weakness the ALS had imposed. "If you're hearing this, then things have gotten complicated. Your mother needs your help, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you make any judgments." Rachel leaned forward, her full attention on the tape player. "You remember your Aunt Catherine and Aunt Diane, don't you? You met them a few times when you were little, then they disappeared from our lives. You probably wondered why. I told you we had a falling out, that families sometimes drift apart. But that wasn't the whole truth." He paused, and I could hear him gathering strength to continue. "When my parents died, they left a will. In that will, they gave me this property, the cabin and land where you're sitting right now. They knew I loved it here, that I'd spent my happiest childhood moments in these mountains. The rest of their estate was to be divided equally among all three of us." Rachel glanced at me, confusion evident on her face. "But that will never made it to probate court," Thomas continued. "Your aunts replaced it with a fake one that divided everything equally, including this land. They sold off the property piece by piece, pocketing millions, and they forged my signature on documents to make it look like I'd agreed." Rachel's hand went to her mouth. "I found out 2 years later. I had proof of what they'd done, enough to send them to prison. But by then, you were born, and your mother and I were building our life in Albany. I made a choice, Rachel. I chose to protect you from the ugliness of family scandal. I walked away and let them think they'd won." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "But I never forgot. And when I got my diagnosis, when I knew my time was limited, I decided it was time to reclaim what they'd stolen. I bought back this cabin from them. They were happy to sell what they thought was worthless land. Then I spent 4 years secretly buying back almost all of the original family estate they'd liquidated." Rachel stood up abruptly, pacing. "Dad bought all this? How? We weren't rich." "Keep listening," I said softly. "I used every penny I'd saved, took out loans against my life insurance, liquidated my retirement accounts. It was worth it, Rachel. Because now this land, all 175 acres of it, belongs to your mother. It's legally hers, uncontestably hers. And because of a resort development happening in the area, it's worth approximately $30 million. Rachel turned to stare at me, her mouth open. "Your aunts don't know about the full extent of the land yet. They think they're fighting over a cabin and 50 acres. They're going to try to manipulate you, Rachel. They're going to tell you lies about your mother, about me, about what we supposedly did wrong. Don't believe them." Thomas's voice softened. "I know this is a lot to take in. I know you're probably angry that I kept secrets, but I need you to stand with your mother. She's going to need your support in the fight that's coming. Can you do that for me? Can you trust that everything I did out of love for both of you?" The tape continued, with Thomas explaining the details of the legal situation, the evidence in the attic, the documentation he'd compiled. When it finally ended, Rachel and I sat in silence for several minutes. "I don't know what to say," Rachel finally whispered. "Dad was fighting a secret war for 4 years, and we had no idea. He was protecting us," I said, "from the truth about his sisters, from the burden of knowing what they'd done." $30 million, Rachel said, still processing. "Mom, that's That's life-changing money. It's not about the money, I replied, though of course it was partially about the money. It's about your father reclaiming what was stolen from him, about justice, about legacy. Rachel walked to the window, looking out at the lake that glinted in the morning sun. Aunt Catherine called me 3 times yesterday. She said you were being irrational, that grief had made you paranoid. She said she and Aunt Diane just wanted to help, to make sure the family property was handled fairly. And what do you think now? She turned to face me, and I saw Thomas in her expression, that same determined set of his jaw when he'd made a decision. I think my aunts are liars and thieves, and I think we need to make sure they don't win this time. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I'd believe you over them? Rachel smiled sadly. Mom, I've known you my whole life. I knew them for maybe a dozen visits when I was a kid. Dad's voice just confirmed what I already suspected. They only contacted me because they want something. She came back to the chair and sat down. So what's our plan? Your grandmother's attorney, Mr. Morrison, is handling the legal side. He said we have a very strong case with all of Dad's documentation. But your aunts have lawyers too, and they're not going to give up easily. What about the resort company? Tranquility Retreats? I haven't contacted them yet. I wanted to secure our legal position first. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. What if we approach them proactively? Let them know we're the legitimate owners and we're interested in discussing options? Your father wanted me to be careful about that. He said in one of the tapes that developers can be predatory, that they might try to pressure us into selling for less than the land is worth. Then we get our own appraiser, our own consultants. We go in informed and prepared. Rachel pulled out her phone. I work in marketing, Mom. I know how to research companies, how to evaluate proposals. Let me help with this. Mrs. Chen appeared with coffee and pastries. I couldn't help overhearing. If I may, Mr. Collins left detailed notes about Tranquility Retreats. He researched their financial position, their other projects, their negotiation tactics. Everything is in the attic. Of course he did, Rachel said with a mixture of pride and sadness. Dad thought of everything. We spent the next several hours in the attic, going through Thomas's meticulous research. He had files on Tranquility Retreat's corporate structure, their funding sources, their timeline for the project, and most importantly, their desperate need for this specific land. Look at this, Rachel said, holding up a document. The resort project is contingent on acquiring Dad's land. If they can't get it, their entire development plan falls apart. They've already invested millions in preliminary work. Which means we have leverage, I said, understanding dawning. Exactly. They need us more than we need them. My phone rang. Morrison. Mrs. Collins, we have a problem. Catherine and Diane filed an emergency injunction. They're claiming you're planning to sell the property fraudulently and that the sale should be blocked until ownership is resolved. Can they do that? They can try. We have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning in Lake Placid. You'll need to be there. We'll be there, I said firmly. Both of us, I added, looking at Rachel. That evening, as we prepared for the legal battle ahead, Rachel explored more of the cabin. She found the kitchen Thomas had renovated, the bedrooms he'd furnished, the porches he'd built to capture the perfect views. He did all this while he was dying, she said, wonder in her voice. How did he have the strength? Love, I said simply. Love gives you strength you didn't know you had. Rachel turned to me suddenly. Mrs. Chen mentioned there's a room you haven't seen yet? Something Dad wanted you to find? Yes, but I've been so focused on the legal situation that I haven't asked about it. Let's look now, before tomorrow's hearing, before everything gets even more complicated. Let's see what Dad's final gift was. I called Mrs. Chen, who smiled knowingly when I asked about the hidden room. I was wondering when you'd remember. Follow me. She led us to what appeared to be a solid wall in the back of the cabin, near the kitchen. Like the entrance to the attic, this was concealed behind a false panel, but this one required a more complex mechanism to open. Mr. Collins said the combination is the first song you ever heard together, Mrs. Chen said, gesturing to a keypad hidden beneath a decorative wooden panel. I thought back to our first date, 40 years ago. Thomas had taken me to a jazz club in Manhattan. We'd been graduate students, poor and in love, and he'd saved for weeks to afford the tickets. "Take 5, I said, by Dave Brubeck. It was the first song that played when we sat down. I tried different combinations based on the title. Finally, 5/4 worked, the time signature of the song. The panel clicked and swung open, revealing a door. Rachel squeezed my hand as I opened it. The room beyond took my breath away. It was a complete music studio, but unlike any I'd seen. The walls were covered in acoustic panels, and in the center of the room sat a beautiful grand piano, its black surface gleaming in the soft light from recessed fixtures. But that wasn't all. The walls were also covered with framed sheet music, dozens of compositions, all in my handwriting. Pieces I'd written in my 20s and 30s, before life got too busy, before teaching and parenting left no time for composing. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered. "These are yours, Mom. These are your songs." "I thought they were lost," I said, moving closer to examine them. "When we moved from our first apartment, a box of my compositions went missing. I thought it was gone forever." "Dad must have found them and kept them," Rachel said, touching one of the frames gently. "He kept them for all these years." On the piano was a folder labeled New Compositions. Inside were blank sheets of staff paper, expensive paper, the kind serious composers used. And there was another cassette tape, labeled simply, For My Composer. With trembling hands, I placed it in the portable tape player Rachel had brought from the main room. Thomas's voice, barely a whisper now, recorded in his final days. "Maggie, if you're hearing this, you found your studio. I hope you like it. I tried to make it soundproof so you can compose at any hour without worrying about disturbing anyone." I could hear his labored breathing between sentences. "You gave up so much for us. Your music was one of the first sacrifices. You sold your compositions along with your vinyl records to help pay for my education. You put your dreams on hold to support mine, to raise our daughter, to build the life we shared." A long pause. "This room is me giving back. Not just the space and the piano, but time. Time to compose again, to create, to be the musician you were always meant to be. The vinyl records in the main room, the studio you're standing in now, they're not just gifts. They're permission. Permission to reclaim the part of yourself you set aside." His voice grew even softer. "I've left instructions with Mrs. Chen. She's to maintain this cabin for as long as you live. Everything is paid for, taken care of. You don't need to worry about bills or maintenance or anything practical. This is your sanctuary, Maggie. Use it, create in it. Live in it if you want, or just visit when you need to remember who you were before the world asks you to be so many other things." A shaky breath. "I love you. I've always loved you. Not just for what you did for me and Rachel, but for who you are. The girl I met in that jazz club who knew more about Brubeck than anyone I'd ever met. The woman who can listen to a song once and play it perfectly on the piano. The composer who sees music in everything." His voice broke. "Make music again, Maggie. For me, for yourself, for all the years we didn't have." The tape ended, and I stood in the studio, tears streaming down my face, feeling the weight of Thomas's love across the years and across death itself. Rachel hugged me tightly. "Dad really knew you, Mom. He saw all of you, even the parts you'd forgotten." I sat at the piano, my fingers trembling as they touched the keys. It had been decades since I'd composed anything, decades since I'd allowed myself to think of music as anything more than something I taught, but my fingers remembered. They found a melody, hesitant at first, then growing more confident. A song for Thomas, for loss, for love that transcends death. Rachel sat on the bench beside me, and we stayed there for a long time, letting music say what words couldn't. The courtroom in Lake Placid was small but formal, wood-paneled and serious. Catherine and Diane sat on one side with their lawyer, Richard Blackwell, looking confident and prepared. Rachel and I sat with Morrison, and I held a folder containing copies of Thomas's evidence. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Brennan, reviewed the preliminary motions with obvious impatience. "This is an emergency hearing regarding an injunction," she said. "Mr. Blackwell, You're asking the court to prevent Mrs. Margaret Collins from selling or transferring property you claim belongs to your clients. On what basis? Blackwell stood smoothly. Your Honor, the property in question was part of the Collins family estate. When my client's parents died, the property should have been divided among all 3 siblings. Instead, Thomas Collins manipulated his ailing mother into leaving it solely to him, then purchased it at an artificially low price, taking advantage of his sister's trust. That's a lie, Rachel said loudly. Half rising from her seat. Ms. Collins, Judge Brennan said sharply. You'll have your chance to speak. Morrison stood. Your Honor, we have extensive documentation proving that Mr. Thomas Collins purchased the property legally and fairly. Furthermore, we have evidence that the petitioners, Ms. Catherine and Ms. Diane Collins, have a history of fraudulent manipulation of family assets. Blackwell's face flushed. Those are serious accusations without foundation. Without foundation? Morrison opened his briefcase. Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence the original will of Harold and Patricia Collins, the parents of all parties involved, along with the fraudulent will that was submitted to probate, and forensic analysis showing the signatures on the fraudulent will were forged. The courtroom went silent. Catherine and Diane's faces went pale. Your Honor, this is, Blackwell stammered. I was not informed of any allegations of will fraud, because you didn't investigate your client's claims before filing frivolous motions, Morrison said calmly. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that 15 years ago, Ms. Catherine and Ms. Diane Collins replaced their parents' legitimate will with a forged document to cheat their brother out of his rightful inheritance. When they realized Mr. Thomas Collins had purchased back the property they'd illegally sold, they embarked on this baseless legal action to steal it once again. Judge Brennan accepted the documents from Morrison and spent several minutes reviewing them. Her expression growing increasingly severe. Mr. Blackwell, did your clients inform you about the existence of an alternate will? No, Your Honor. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Ms. Catherine Collins. Ms. Diane Collins, please stand, the judge ordered. The sisters stood reluctantly. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. Is it true that you were aware of a different will than the one probated 15 years ago? Catherine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Diane looked at the floor. Your silence is noted, Judge Brennan said coldly. Not only is this injunction denied, but I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of will fraud. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mrs. Margaret Collins attorney fees for defending against this frivolous action. She looked at Morrison. Do you have the deed showing your client's legal ownership of the property? Yes, Your Honor, along with bank records showing Mr. Thomas Collins paid his sisters $50,000 for the property 4 years ago, a transaction they willingly entered into. Then the property unquestionably belongs to Mrs. Collins. This case is dismissed. The gavel came down with a finality that felt like liberation. As we stood to leave, Catherine grabbed my arm in the hallway. You don't understand what you've done. This will destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, I said quietly. 15 years ago, when you chose greed over family, Thomas gave you a chance to walk away with something. You should have taken it. That property is worth millions now, Diane said desperately. The resort development, the land value, you can't just keep it all. Watch me, I said, and walked away with Rachel and Morrison. 2 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at Tranquility Retreat's corporate office. Rachel beside me, Morrison across the table, and a team of appraisers and consultants we'd hired to advise us. The CEO of Tranquility Retreats, a polished woman named Sandra Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, looked slightly nervous as she reviewed our proposal. Mrs. Collins, I'll be frank. We need your land to complete our project. We've invested over $20 million in planning and preliminary construction. Without your property, we have to scrap everything. I understand, I said calmly, which is why I'm offering you a deal. We're prepared to offer $30 million for the full property, Sandra said. I'm not selling. Her face fell. Mrs. Collins, please, name your price. $40 million? We can structure it with installments if that helps with taxes. You misunderstand. I'm not interested in selling the property at any price, but I am interested in a partnership. I slid a proposal across the table, one that Rachel and I had worked on for days with our consultants. I'll lease you the land you need for your resort. for a period of 50 years. In exchange, you'll pay an annual fee, maintain 25 acres around my cabin as a private nature preserve, and give me approval rights on any construction that might impact the environmental integrity of the area. Sandra read through the proposal, her expression shifting from confusion to consideration. This is unprecedented. It ensures you get what you need, and I keep ownership of land that has tremendous sentimental value. It's a win for both of us. She looked at her team, who were already doing calculations. One of them nodded slightly. The annual fees you're proposing are substantial, Sandra said. Higher than a mortgage would cost us. But you get certainty, Rachel interjected. No more negotiations, no more uncertainty. You can move forward with your project immediately. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. Mrs. Collins, you drive a hard bargain. But you have a deal. 6 months later, I sat at the grand piano in my studio, finishing a composition I'd titled For Thomas. Through the soundproof walls, I could faintly hear construction sounds as Tranquility Retreats built their resort. But they were far enough away that they didn't disturb the peace of my sanctuary. Rachel visited every few weeks, often bringing friends or colleagues who marveled at the cabin and the vast record collection. She'd taken a leave from her marketing job to help manage the property and our new partnership with the resort. Catherine and Diane had been quietly charged with will fraud. They'd accepted plea deals that involved restitution and probation, avoiding prison but losing their professional reputations. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I felt no guilt either. They'd made their choices. The vinyl records Thomas had collected surrounded me with music and memories. I'd started playing them systematically, one album each evening, sometimes composing responses to what I heard. Mrs. Chen had become more than a caretaker. She'd become a friend. She often sat in the main room while I composed, reading or doing needlework, a comfortable presence that reminded me I wasn't alone. I still watched the weekly tapes, though now more sporadically. I'd reached week 30, and each message felt like a conversation with Thomas, his voice guiding me through grief and toward something new. In week 27, he'd said, "Grief isn't something you get over, Maggie. It's something you get through. And on the other side, you find not the person you were before loss, but someone new. Someone shaped by love and loss and survival. I hope you like who you're becoming." I did. For the first time in years, I was not just Maggie the widow, or Maggie the mother, or Maggie the professor. I was Maggie the composer, Maggie the custodian of a beautiful legacy, Maggie who was learning to honor the past while building something new. The composition finished. I played it through once more, hearing Thomas in every note. The grief was still there, would always be there, but so was the love. So was the music. So was the extraordinary gift he'd left me. Not just property or money, but permission to rediscover myself. Rachel appeared in the doorway, knowing to wait until I'd finished playing before speaking. "That's beautiful, Mom. Is it done?" "I think so. Want to hear it from the beginning?" She sat in the comfortable chair Thomas had placed in the corner of the studio, positioned perfectly for listening. As I played, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From Thomas's deathbed, promise to the cabin I'd sworn never to visit. From widow to victor in a legal battle I'd never expected to fight. Thomas had been right about so many things. His sister's greed, their predictable legal challenges, the value of thorough documentation, and most importantly, his faith that I was strong enough to handle whatever came. But he'd been wrong about one thing. He'd worried that I'd be angry about the secrets, about the illness he'd hidden, about the years of secret planning I'd known nothing about. I wasn't angry. I was grateful. Grateful for the love that had motivated him to build this sanctuary. Grateful for the foresight that had protected Rachel and me. Grateful for the gift of music returned to my life. The last notes of the composition faded, and Rachel applauded softly. "Dad would love that," she said. "He'd be so proud of you." "I hope so," I replied. I think this whole journey has been about learning what he already knew. That the best way to honor someone's memory is to live fully, to create, to find joy even after devastating loss. Through the studio window, I could see the lake where Thomas had spent his childhood summers. The mountains that had witnessed generations of Collins family history, both beautiful and ugly. This land had been stolen, reclaimed, and was now secured for future generations. Not divided among greedy siblings, but preserved as it was always meant to be. My phone buzzed with a message from Morrison. Final paperwork signed. Property and all associated rights are permanently and unquestionably yours. Thomas would be proud. Congratulations, Maggie, I smiled, thinking of Thomas's voice on those tapes. His careful planning, his enduring love. Thank you. My darling, I whispered to the mountain air, to the ghost of the man who had known me better than I knew myself, who had seen the composer I'd forgotten I was, and who had built me a sanctuary to remember. The vinyl records waited in the main room, thousands of songs still unheard. The blank composition paper waited on the piano, ready for new music. The mountains waited outside, patient and eternal, and I waited for nothing. For the first time since Thomas's death, I was fully present, fully alive, fully myself. My name is Margaret Collins. My husband died 3 years ago, but his love lives on in every corner of this cabin, in every vinyl record, in every note I compose. He asked me never to come here, then left me a map to find my way home. I broke my promise. And in doing so, I found not just a property or an inheritance, but the woman I was always meant to become, and that, in the end, was Thomas's greatest gift of all. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that uncover the hidden truths of everyday life. There are so many more untold stories waiting to be revealed. Thank you for being here. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in their place? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them with me in the comments below. On the screen, you can see 2 more life stories I strongly recommend. There are many more waiting on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.